First of all, I'd like to say thank you for all of you being here, and thank you to your school and your town and your interested officials, because this is a critically important topic. I put this picture up here on purpose because it is very uncomfortable. It is dirty. It is something that makes you feel like your skin is crawling, and that is what heroin addiction is about. I'm the DuPage County coroner, and because of that, I deal with all of the deaths that occur in this county due to drug addictions, due to heroin addiction, and such. I'm also a medical doctor, and so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the medical aspects of what we're talking about tonight, and intro into the other criminality issues that we'd be talking about. So, heroin, the story with heroin starts with this beautiful flower. It's a poppy flower. It's a beautiful plant. We have the plant here in America, except it does not produce the amount of drug that the poppy plants from Afghanistan or Mexico cause. The flower turns into this pod, and this pod is scored, and this sap pours out of it. And thousands of years ago, people realized that this sap has the highest amount of morphine of any natural plant or product in the world, and that sap then is scraped off of there, and that tar or that collected thing has a morphine content of about 12% to 15%, and that's what we call opium. And the opium is then processed, and that processed material is processed into heroin. But the old-fashioned idea that came from when I was in high school, when I was in a building like this, is this black tar. And this black tar is the old type of heroin that was produced. It's very low content of heroin, and it had to be injected. So the typical thing that I have in my mind of a heroin addict is someone who's injecting this drug into their system and is a real down-and-out person in an alley. And that was the old picture. The new picture is because of this. We have the drug cartels, and the people who are processing this drug are now processing it to very, very refined heroin. It's very pure, it's white, it's clean, and the important part of that is that you do not have to inject it anymore. It can be snorted, it can be smoked, so it can be ingested into the system without injecting it into your system. I've talked to many heroin addicts who have said, I've never injected heroin in my life. So that's because we have this really refined heroin. The other important aspect of this is that it's cheap and it's available. So in the Chicagoland area, we have highly refined, highly potent heroin like this that's available for $10 a bag. This is a key slide. You can see on this slide that there are all kinds of different street drugs on there. LSD, ecstasy, cannabis. They're all kind of in the middle. And then way in the upper corner, you see a drug that's hanging off the chart. And on the bottom, there's physical harm. And on the left-hand side, there's dependence. So the most dangerous drug to your body and the most addictive drug in the whole pantheon of illegal drugs is heroin. It is hanging off the chart, and that's why tonight we're talking about this drug in a specific way, not adding all these other drugs, not confusing the conversation. We're talking about heroin. So how does heroin work? So heroin has to get into the body, so it's either injected or it's smoked. Somehow it gets into the body. It has to, what I call, get in the door. It has to get into the brain. It has to cross the blood-brain barrier. It has to become what I call the golden goose. It has to break down to morphine. All of the drugs, whether it's Vicodin, OxyContin, any of these drugs, it has to break down to morphine in the brain. And then it has to get a good reception. It actually attaches to opiate receptors that are in the brain. The morphine molecule and the heroin molecule look almost identical. The only thing that heroin does is that it gets across the blood-brain barrier much quicker than morphine or these other drugs do. So that's what heroin does, that is different. It is quicker into the brain than anything else. And there it breaks down into morphine, and that's what then affects the brain. So how does it work in the brain? All of these arrows are pointing to a very central portion of the brain. And I just want to point out very quickly that we have receptors in our brain that are affected by what we call endorphins. And you've heard those before. You go out and you go on a 5-mile run and you get endorphins. And it makes you feel good because all of these things are things that make you heal, that you feel better. If you eat well, you have endorphins. All of these things are things that help our body and help us feel good and be rewarded. Well, all of the drugs that are addictive and all of these drugs that affect us attach to the same receptors that our natural body endorphins do. The only thing that they do is attach and stimulate it 10 times more. So these all affect these reward mechanisms. And I'm going to go through these quickly because these are a lot of scientific terms. But basically, in the brain, there is dopamine, which is what stimulates us, which is what makes us want to do more, and then there's serotonin, which tells us that we're doing fine. All of these drugs make us have more dopamine, which makes us be more stimulated and more active, not the serotonin, which makes us be more satisfied. And most importantly, I'm just going to skip to this area called the locus ceruleus. And this is one of the most primitive areas in our brain. It's very, very deep in our brain. It's very central. And it's the area that if you are addicted to a drug or anything, it will stimulate you to do anything to get that drug. This is the area that makes you commit felonies, to go out and steal from your mom, steal from your friends, to be dishonest. And as a friend of mine who's a recovered heroin addict says, this is the area that steals your soul. This is what makes you not be a human being anymore. So what does heroin do to you? It is a stimulant of all of the areas in your brain and your body that make you feel comfortable, that make you feel happy. So a person who's on heroin or morphine or Vicodin or Oxycontin is a person who's sleeping in the corner, who's very satisfied, very warm, not the person who's very stimulated and being obstruction to the police. It's not like PCP or cocaine or some of these other drugs. It makes you feel very comfortable. What is the long-term action of of heroin? Almost every addict to heroin will tell you that within 1, 2, 3, 4 times of taking heroin, you are mentally and physically addicted. And it certainly isn't any more than that. And some people say it's the first time, some people say it's the 4th time, but you become addicted. There are no occasional heroin users. You don't take heroin one weekend and then go away for a while and then take it a couple of weekends later. There are other drugs that you can do that. I don't want to confuse this conversation tonight with those things. When you're a heroin addict, you are addicted to heroin 24/7. Every day, you have to have that amount of drugs in your system or you're going to get sick. And it becomes a point where you are no longer getting high. You're no longer getting that high feeling that you're looking for. All you're doing is taking these drugs to keep you from being sick. And it is a lifestyle of addiction, addiction, addiction. There are only a few versions of this lifestyle. It is that you are either an active addict going out and getting your drugs every day, and to do that, you are probably spending a couple of $100 to $300 or $400 a day on these drugs. Most normal people don't have $300 or $400 a day to spend on a habit like this. So what do? You go to criminal activity. You become a felon. You go out and steal. You rob. You robbed from your parents. You do whatever you can. So you end up in either as you're an active addict or because you've been caught doing a felony, you're in the criminal justice system. If you take too much of this drug, which is way too common, you end up in my office in the morgue, or luckily you get the help that you need and you become a recovered addict. Those are the 4 pathways. There really aren't a lot of other choices for you. I'm going to talk a little bit about the experience that we've had in DuPage County with heroin deaths. This is a chart of the years from 2007 to 2013. 2007, we had about 20-some heroin deaths a year. So that is about 1 every 2 weeks. As we went on to 2013, we had 46 heroin deaths in last year. And those, I'll show you a little statistics later, but that was an astonishing number. As you can see, it's going up and it's becoming very, very epidemic. 2012, not last year, the year before, we had 38 deaths that were purely attributed to heroin, mainly males, 30 to 8. And you can see we had 1 teenager, mostly 20-year-olds, then the next most number is 30-year-olds. Why is that? It's because, as I said, this isn't a long lifestyle. You are doing something that is causing you to spend hundreds of dollars a day. You're either in the criminal justice system or you end up overdosing and becoming ill and dying. The 49, 50 year, those ranges, those are almost all people that my group, doctors, have gotten addicted to opiates through pills. I'm not blaming the doctors. I'm just saying that is a pathway into that. And then those people become heroin addicts because they can't afford 100 Vicodin a day anymore. It's cheaper to go out and get the heroin. And it's really counterintuitive, but that's what happens. So these are the towns that people lived in that died in 2012. I don't put this up here to pimp any town. I come from Lombard. It's at the top of the list. The point of this is that it's not the rich towns, it's not the poor towns, it's not the rich people, it's not the poor people, it's not the blacks, the Hispanics, it's not the whites. It's every town in DuPage County, it's every socioeconomic group, and it's every age. There is no hot spot in DuPage County where you're going to find these problems. 2013, where we were going along in 2013, about the same as we were in 2012. We got about, in January, we had 4 deaths, so that's about 1 a week. But you can see that in July, there were 11 heroin deaths in July, and there were 18 total drug deaths. So we had 7 other drug deaths that were not heroin related. 18 total. We had a body a day coming into the morgue from July 4th weekend on. And that just obviously shook us all up. We've been out talking as much as we can before that and after that. I don't know for sure if all this talking and ruckus that we've created about this is what caused that great decrease in deaths going into December. I hope it's true. I hope that we are getting out to the community and getting people to understand how deadly this disease is. In 2013, the other thing I wanted to point out really quickly is that if you look at the teenagers, we had 5 teenagers in 2013, 15 to 19. We had 2 20-year-olds and 2 21-year-olds. So that means we had 9 people that weren't legally able to drink die of heroin overdose in DuPage County last year. And these are the towns. Again, the towns changed. There isn't a hot spot. It is all of our towns. We need to be careful about this in our whole community. Took a quick look at all of the toxicology. When we do an autopsy or when we evaluate this, we do a test with 350 different tests, and we find these opiate drugs in the system. But also it's important, antidepressants. There are 11 of the 38 people had antidepressants in their system. They're not taking that because it was getting them high. They're taking it because mental illness and drug addiction are very closely correlated. And these are people that were on antidepressants because they were being treated for that disease by a medical doctor. Also important, you can see that amphetamines and cocaine, the drugs that make you stimulated, are not really common in this system. It doesn't make sense to take cocaine when you're taking an opiate because they do opposite things to your body. And the last thing on the bottom, we had about a third of the people were drinking at the same time too. So there was not one person that had one drug in their system. It's a poly-drug thing. You're either drinking, doing some cannabis, doing some different drugs, and that type of thing. So that was our experience. I'm happy to answer any questions later, but I thank you for your time and your concentration. It's really wonderful that your principal and your leaders in your community have opened this forum up. Thank you for your time.